Now I'd like to turn to Chris Blackmar for what Chris calls his sandbox modeling. Chris, welcome.
Well, thank you. And hello there, my fellow modelers. Bear with me one split second here and I don't know if you guys, there we go. You guys should be seeing the screen now.
No, we are not.
Okay, let me go back here and try this share screen thing again.
There we are.
There you go.
All right, well, welcome to the second series of the Sandbox and the Small Miners Shack, which we are currently building. This will continue our board by board construction. We're looking at doing some windows and door construction tonight, along with getting into a little bit of carving and coloring of some plaster, which will turn into chimneys in the foundation. I would like to remind everybody that the plans and information for this and other builds upcoming here are found in Pat Harriman's Volume 1 Structure Plan book, Wood Frame and Stone Structures. That book has 44 plans in the Volume 1. There's 2 volumes. Both of these books can be obtained hard copy wise from the Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine. That's mrhmag.com underneath their store tab. You can also download immediately the plans. Currently, they're having a sale, which is about 35% off for each. That brings your hard copy price down to $30 a volume, or $20 for both volumes if you get it in the e-plans. Those of you that have been longtime NMRA magazine subscribers, Pat Harriman did a whole series of his plans a couple of years ago, and a couple of cabins were included, and the small miners shed that we're building here was one of those 2 cabins, if I recall correctly. Unfortunately, I can't tell you which volume it was in because I moved about 9 months ago and I got rid of all of my old bulletins along with a bunch of other magazines during that move. If you will recall, we were working on this, oops, let me go back here. We were working on this seam right here. And tonight we're going to get into building the door. So I'm going to give you the information of the strips of wood file size that we're using. I'm going to go into the graining of the wood. Notice here that I'm doing something a bit different. This time I'm bringing in a marker, and we're going to use that marker, which is a French gray. That's going to give us a little bit more of a warmer tone, undertone than the A&I alcohol mix would give us. And whenever I do something kind of weird, like a red and blue combination here, I'll give you the reasons I'm doing that. In this particular case, there was an old Frenchman that lived in this cabin, and he wanted to kind of celebrate his national colors. I'm then going to go in and give you the coloring for this particular structure. Notice here that I'm pointing out a number 2 stencil brush. And if you look at the chipping that this gives us, it's a much tighter chipping than the chipping that we originally created with the resist. And so on this cabin face or on this wall face right now, we have 4 different types of weathering effects. We have the knot holes, we have the shadow in the seam and the wicking effect of this seam. We have the white board going into a brown board, to a board that is fully colored, to boards that have just a little bit of color streaking on them. And then you have this tight chipping inside the blue areas on the door and the door frame. So this is going to add a lot of that eye candy to your models. Believe it or not, your eye picks up on them. You mentally register it. You just don't consciously see it unless you're looking for it. I'm then going to bring up the fact that last time I brought up a tip that using the lid of the A&I stain to stain the ends of the boards. Here that shows up again. And then finally, I'm using double-sided tape to hold down the door boards as I'm making the actual door. I build a lot of jigs on the fly, and that's about as simple as of a fixture as you can come up with. We're next going to get into the window coloring and the framing. Again, we're down to the couple of different sizes of strip wood. We're going to go through how to color and mark and grain that wood. If I become aware of some coloring issues that you could run into, I will again give you a heads up. In this case, it's a 2-to-1 ratio of the ceramic coat barn red with the Vallejo pale blue gray will give you a pink effect. So just be aware of that. So only 1 drop here. I will always let you know this is probably due to the compounding of the paint, probably in the Vallejo pale blue gray, but that's a subject for an entirely different session, and we'll address that when we get into the color wheel and a few things like that. We will then go into actually putting together this whole structure, and I will tell you, just like if we're doing a brush, what size of brush to use. If I use a marker that has a small end or a pointed end and a large end, I will let you know which end I use. I usually will tell you what castings I use, the manufacturer and the part number. In this particular case, it was just out of my scrap box and I didn't have that information available. And down here, I am telling you in this bottom section that all the walls were then put together using magnets, small metal squares, machinist blocks, and a couple of 2x2 metal plates. That's a lot of mouthful of words. May not mean a whole lot to you now, but hang on. If I find a company that I use a lot, but I don't necessarily put them into references, when it becomes important, once in a while, I'll bring up their information. In this particular case, it's K&J Magnetics. They have really good prices on magnets if you're interested in using magnets. So then I'm going to show you some pictures of what's going on. Here's our 2 windows. Again, we have the boarded up window and then the blue French window. I'd like to point out something here that I brought up a little bit earlier, and that is these knot holes. You probably didn't notice that this knot hole and this knot hole gives you 2 different styles of texture. But not only that, but you also have the 2 different widths of boards right here. When you were first looking at this, you probably didn't notice that, but now that I pointed it out to you, you are registering it. This is what I mean, that a detailed model, your eye will pick up a lot of information and transfer that to other models on your layout. So if you build one or two models for the front of your layout to a very highly detailed level, then the rest of your layout will take on a much finer finished appearance because the mind mentally adds all these details in for you on those other models. As I told you, that big mouthful of fixture parts to put the walls together, here's how they go together. You've got the walls themselves, the blocks, the plates, and the magnets. We're next going to get into the chimney. In this particular case, I'm using plaster of Paris. I chose that material over hydrocal because it's readily available. It's a little bit easier to work with than hydrocal. And as this is the beginning model, we're going to keep it down at the lowest common denominator. I'm then telling you that I made a hole in the top of the casting and used jeweler files to carve that out. The foundation, I'm telling you how thick it is, and so that you can make your forms for the pour that you'll be doing. I then am going to give you information and references if I use somebody else's painting techniques and or assembly techniques, whatever techniques. In this case, it's Randy Peppercott out of Downtown Deco, and I'm going to give you a reference to his how-to articles. If I deviate from his instructions, I'll also give you a heads up that that's what I'm doing. So here you can see the carved chimney. Here is the chimney opening, and this is the foundation wall. This is a experiment right here where the mortar failed, a rock fell out. If this didn't work out, I can cover it with a weed, dirt, something. So it's a good place to test it out. The big point of this picture, however, is to show you the fine detail that I got by using the arc welder's brush or the welder's brush that I described earlier in the documentation. Just a different wall, again, showing the detail that you can get. And then we come up to the coloring of the chimney. Now, when I start getting into items where we have multiple things going on at once, I will often try to list that stuff in the order of usage. So that's what I try to do here. I don't always get it done that way, but I try to do it that way so that you can set up your desk appropriately if you're kind of a organization freak like I am. If I'm doing something special in the coloring or whatever it is that I'm doing, and I'm after one specific item, I'll point that out to you so that you know that that's what I'm trying to do. I grew up near the Clear Creek area in Colorado. A lot of the rocks have a white speckles in their coloring, and I wanted to see if I could capture that in this plaster pouring and coloring. Here are the instructions to actually putting together and coloring the various mixtures that were used in the coloring of the plaster. And I give you right down to the drops, the formulas and everything else. This is what I used. It's not what you have to use. It merely is a starting point, but it gives you some idea of some place to go and utilize the materials that you have at hand. If I'm using any other techniques or anything, as those become appropriate, I'll bring that up to your attention, like the capillary action here for creating the grout lines with the wash. If I end up not utilizing something, I'll also bring that to your attention. Like here, I did not use the gesso as I had planned and expressed earlier. That way you don't come up to the end of that build section and say, wow, what happened to this? Because I didn't use it. Did he miss it? Did I miss it? Whatever. you've at least got a reference to it. Here you can see where we're at, the basic chimney coloring. Here's the top end with the stack opening. And here you can see that white speckling. This is really kind of glarish and just screams I'm not quite right. And in HO scale, this is way out of scale. As you can see, the two pieces together just don't quite look right. I'm not real happy with it. If we put the cabin on top of it, it's still screaming I'm not quite right. So we're going to do a preliminary evaluation. Look at that. Here I'm telling you the speckles are not quite right. It may work for O scale. The correction to that or probable correction to that, I'm telling you I'm going to do some additional weathering here to try to correct that. Here I discussed the use of the gesso on the chimney. And down here, I'm talking about the overall coloring and referencing the prototype picture that I'm using. Right now, the stones are about like the top 1/3 of this chimney. That's not what I'm after. I'm after the bottom 1/3, which is very soft. And so we got to get from this to this. And so if there's anything that I made huge errors on, I'm going to bring that to your attention so you can possibly avoid that if you read the instructions through once before starting. And finally, any other oddball notes that I need to throw in. In this case, it's a diorama note on why that base casting is so wide. If I didn't use Randy's or the recommendations in the coloring, the references, then I'm going to bring that up to your attention and why I didn't use it. And here I'm telling you my thinking process and what I'm going to do to try to adjust the coloring. And this is the adjustments to the coloring of the parts. And this is what I ended up with, which you can see is a much softer colors for both the chimney and for the foundation. And that more represents that bottom 1/3 of that prototype picture that I presented earlier. And so that brings me up to the end of this presentation. Next time we will add a add a lid to the box that we have, a porch, some final weathering, and the final build evaluation. Currently, if you wanted to go on ahead and try to do the build on this, the entire build notes, which are the instructions that I've been kind of running through here, can be found on the NewTracks website. It's on the Watch Me Build tab, and underneath my Sandbox series is notes for the first project, the Small Miners Shack. So that's it for me, unless somebody has some questions or there are some comments.
Yeah, can you put the link in the chat so I can put it on YouTube?
Yeah, we can try to get that done here.
Chris, I really do appreciate you doing this. I really admire the artistic touches that you bring to your modeling. I think that's really, really fantastic.
Thank you.
For everybody's information, Chris mentioned Pat Harriman. And Pat was an architect. And I've known Pat or knew Pat for years and years and years. He recently passed away. Pat's drawings in the model, the NMRA publication, I think he did that, I think, for years. I'm not sure how many years, but it wasn't just one or two of them. I mean, he had a new structure in every issue of that publication. And the nice part about it was, because he was an architect, they were very realistic buildings. I mean, they actually looked like the structure that he was talking about. And the other thing that was nice about it, he included the parts number for all of the doors and windows that he had included in his structures, so that anybody that was building them knew exactly what part number, and what window and door to use, and therefore the dimensions of each one of the holes that needed to be cut in the sides. Pat was a tremendous modeler. He was heavily involved with the NMRA's achievement program, and just a really fine gentleman. But the drawings that he did and that are available are just really outstanding if anybody is interested in looking at them.